go, you can always end up in some sort of bad minimum.
So the sum of the parts
deliberately add noise to escape.
Because when you
sum of the parts is bigger than.
Yeah, the best analogy I've heard is that when you're doing stochastic gradient descent, it's like wearing flippers on the optimization landscape, so that you don't fall into these holes.
What I mean is that if at the end your model is good, in the sense that you did, even with stochastic gradient descent, I would expect something like maybe more noisy on during the training the entropy, but at the end they should converge to the same correlations between as it seems to be, no?
Yeah, but then you'd still need to say why this compression is happening. What's the precursor of this compression? So the original idea was that it was the noise of the batching that was the precursor for this behavior, but now there's no noise and behavior is still.
It was a hypothesis, if I remember right, it was a hypothesis. It wasn't demonstrated very clearly in the paper.
Yeah, there was
an assumption which you could question, and I mean intuitively is not. It wasn't obvious that it would be the case.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it's in a way, it's not surprising that checking in depth, you notice that in fact it's not that. It wasn't mandated that it would be that in the first place. I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was the case because that paper received a lot of attention to it and media attention, and it was important to actually make these experiments and actually say no, you can make these claims just out of thin air. Because there was no rigor in the previous paper, there was no theory in blenders or anything like that. Okay, so this is a very simple experiment, very good one. Really can't say much more about it. Just well done.
Was there a reason why didn't they see this in the original paper? Like, is it the same data set they used in the last one?
Well, I wouldn't know. Maybe there was a reason, but the original paper just kind of presented a very beautiful picture, and then that picture just didn't hold up after this kind of scrutiny.
I'm just trying to explore if there's a reason why there's some difference between the data that in one case it would happen, one case it wouldn't.
Well, no, there's no difference. So really, so they're just saying they're just eliminating. They're just using a different methodology.
I also think that one of the strong points of this paper is that what they are actually trying to say is that the general claims from the previous paper are not actually general, or at least not as general as they claimed before. They said, that stochastic gradient descent produces this type of compression phase, and they're saying, wait, no, it's not stochastic gradient descent because when you take conversion, it doesn't happen. And then they said, well, the non-linearities are causing this compression as well. And then they said, no, well, if you use Rebuttal, then you don't see compression. So it's so they're sort of narrowing it down, well, that is true, but only for these very specific cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last experiment, they trained. So they actually kind of looked at the two phases that we saw before in the in this picture here. So the phases of mean and variance switching and the phases of compression. Just with these networks that they trained with ReLU and hyperbolic tangent, and they once again saw no correlation in that because they found that this transition here is a general phenomenon. This happens all the time, while this compression here just happens depending only on whether you are using double saturation activation function or not. And that finding, I think it's somewhere in the appendix I. Over here, so yeah, so these are different layers, and this is hyperbolic tangent, and this is ReLU, and so they are all doing this shift thing, and while we don't see compression with mutual information. And the last small experiment was yes, here. So they made a new data set where they 70% of the data set was just random noise, completely non-related to the output, and then 30% of the data set was the actual data set with the output. So they just slapped some random noise to the data and fed all of this to the neural network. And their result was that if you measure mutual information with the junk noise part of the data set, you see that there is compression happening. And if you measure the overall or information just with the correct thing, in both of these there's no compression. So compression can happen simultaneously with absence of compression depending on which part of the data you're looking at. And I think they used a REL network for that, but I'm not sure they don't give details. Also, it's student teacher setup, section 3, so maybe these were linear networks. So their conclusions are that compression is not a general feature of networks, and that it's not linked to stochastic gradients, shifts in variance in mean, and that the performance of the network is also not linked to compression. You can have compression without performance, or you can have performance without compression. They remain optimistic that you can use information bottleneck a bit more. A heavy criticism that this paper received was their reliance on binning, because people said, well, your binning procedure is very sort of ad hoc, why would you use that? And so they emphasized that they actually used a different estimator called kernel density estimation procedure, which is somewhat different to binning. And they provided both kernel density and binning results. So kernel density works something like that. So if you have binning, you just slice your range, and then you put values into that, and that gives you kind of a histogram. What you do with kernel density estimation, that you pick a kernel which is like a Gaussian, and then you place these kernels everywhere that you see data, and then you sum them up. So it's kind of like if you have sand, you can put small clouds of sand everywhere, and then in the end you'll have something like very smooth. And it comes with problems of selecting the right value of the width of the sort of Gaussian.
So it's also a binning width, right?
Yeah, again, so it's kind of like binning, but
The size of the beans, yeah.
it gives
The same
you
but
something
different.
very smooth. And this works better with little data. So if you don't have enough data to produce very smooth binning kind of histogram, this can be your friend. So on this picture we see, so if you have very small kernel noise, then the overall probability will be very noisy. If you have very big one, it won't really fit well to your real data. So there is some tuning that you need to apply to kernel density in order to have some good results at approximating your
One
probability.
question: when they do the binning, do they bin on input and output at the same time? Because technically that is, I think, what they would have to do. They would have to compare against the same bin size input and output in order to talk about compression.
For each layer.
Yes, so typically what they
the
do.
binning of the previous layer is the input, technically.
Don't they compare to the input in general, the X input?
The X input.
Yes. Don't they compare each layer information, the information between the output of the layer and the input that goes into the network?
Oh yeah, so you're asking why they not comparing mutual information between